Good afternoon, welcome. Let's kick off. Really appreciate everyone taking the time today. Special week this week. It is Mental Health Week. It has been. We were just talking before we came on Zoom how difficult a year it's been for all of us as we've kind of navigated kind of into this crazy new normal that we're all living with. Where we live in our homes, we live in our Zoom bubbles, and if you're in Auckland, you kind of get locked away a bit more frequently than if you live in other parts of New Zealand. And that on the first go around was kind of interesting and fun, so to speak, although the stakes were really high. Second time around's been obviously a whole lot harder. So it's a really interesting conversation today around staying well, staying healthy, keeping focused on things that we can do. And obviously Mental Health Week is about shining the light on some of those topics. Whether we're in our teams, whether we're in our families, whether we are in our businesses, many of us have a role to play to help people kind of come to terms with what they see in front of them. The data is pretty startling. You know, the FSC has been out in market many times this year. Money worries, mental health worries, concerns for health, concerns for family, concerns for clients rate really, really highly. And some of the data around how often you worry about life in general and the connection between money and well-being is kind of huge. So today's discussion is really about opening our eyes to some of that discussion. We've been working just recently with the Lifeline team and absolutely delighted to welcome both Megan Barclay and Helena de Fontenay to this discussion. Megan has an area of focus around business development and partnering with community organisations, and Helena does a bunch of things, including some of the ops and some of the very frontline work. So we're in for a really interesting discussion. It is Zoom, so there is a Q&A. I'm going to hand over to Megan and Helena in a moment. They'll talk with us for the best part of 15 to 20 minutes. As ever on Zoom, we have our Q&A button, our chat button, so feel free to ask questions as we go through, and we will explore and engage some of those topics. So with that note, again, Megan and Helena, thank you for taking the time. Floor is yours, and love your opening slide and love the graphic on that, and we might come back to that a little later on.
Great. Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Megan Barclay toku ingoa. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Richard. Helena, would you like to say hi?
Hi everyone, I'm Helena. Nice to be with you guys today.
Great. Okay, so we'll head straight into it. And what I'd like to share with all of you today is that the fact that Lifeline is a not-for-profit organisation. We are completely non-government funded, so receive no government income at all. We are predominantly funded through family, household and small business, large corporate donor contributions financially to ensure the service remains sustainable, as well as a portion of our operating resources are provided through Presbyterian Support Northern to support Lifeline and its existence. And so Lifeline is a service that essentially is very essential to all New Zealanders across Aotearoa. Lifeline has had 56 years of listening to and supporting New Zealanders. And we support 5 million Kiwis to essentially have courageous conversations with a person who's prepared to listen to them, to connect with them, and to support them in whatever situation they may be facing on that particular day. 3.5% of New Zealanders contact Lifeline every year, and that is either through our text message service, which has become the more predominant and most in some months the most popular medium for people to contact us. It tends to be the channel of choice for the younger generation. People aged between 16 through to 25 prefer to contact Lifeline and have a text conversation with a counsellor over text messaging, as well as the traditional approach, which is through phone calls. And Lifeline also provides face-to-face counselling to a certain percentage of that 3.5% who contact Lifeline. So interestingly, Lifeline does not only serve New Zealanders who may be having suicidal thoughts or who might need to talk to somebody about the fact that they're feeling that they have become a burden and no longer wish to continue their life. Lifeline counsellors take calls for a huge variety of reasons, and a lot of them are consistent with the insights that Richard just shared with you around people contacting Lifeline around emotional and relationship distress relating to financial challenges, also reasons relating to anxiety and depression due to work-related stress or stress relating to employee or employer challenges in terms of relationships at work, and also relating to grief and loss through a lost family member, or maybe somebody contacting Lifeline who has a concern for a colleague or an employee. We have a number of business owners and people leaders who contact Lifeline just wanting to check in as to what they might do to support a colleague or a teammate who they think might be experiencing some kind of emotional or mental health distress. Lifeline last year supported around 3,000 New Zealanders by developing safety plans for them. A safety plan essentially is for the increasing number of New Zealanders who are speaking to a counsellor who are at higher risk of requiring some kind of crisis intervention. And our counsellors will ensure that that person is safe and ensure that the right services are proactively contacted to go out and check on that person to ensure that they are safe to themselves and safe to those around them. And there has been an increasing number of safety plans needing to be implemented since COVID and 19 and the various lockdowns that New Zealand has experienced. We also provide education and training services into the business and community sectors. So last year we provided 30 odd businesses and community organisations, which includes government departments, various ministries, with education and training around how to support their staff and how to support their customers and clients who are going through some kind of emotional distress. The reason why it's important for adults in the community to know how to support one another and themselves is because unfortunately New Zealand has one of the highest youth suicide rates in the OECD. And the two other countries that are ahead of New Zealand are in fact Lithuania and Singapore. And it's critical to us as an organisation that we can ensure the community knows how to wrap itself around others, particularly our young people who are more and more struggling with the challenges of society and not really knowing who they can reach out to for support. Across New Zealand, 50% of New Zealanders are touched in some way by a loss due to suicide, which is significant. And so therefore every ounce of breath that our counsellors and our team have at Lifeline is to ensure that all New Zealanders are supported when they're feeling distressed. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't know who to reach out to, and so that is why over the last 12 months we've embarked on an initiative and an exercise to ensure that the skills and expertise that we have inside Lifeline through our counsellors and our clinical support staff can be shared with the wider community. So I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So since COVID, Lifeline has experienced a 25% increase in contacts to our helplines, and that's tech services as well. The main issues have been, not surprisingly, around loneliness and isolation. Essentially, that is from all walks of life across New Zealand, people who are feeling isolated from their family members, from their children, from grandchildren, also from their own children. For example, if they're living in a blended family situation and not being able to know what their children are up to when they're with another partner or spouse or in another household, as well as people who are older and people who are in work situations where they feel isolated from their colleagues and their workmates. A lot more people are experiencing anxiety and depression since the onset of COVID and the response that New Zealand has had. And there have been an increasing number of contacts to the helpline relating to family and work-related relationship issues. So again, consistent with the statistics that Richard mentioned earlier. We've also noticed that there have been an increase in inquiries from the financial sector on how to support frontline staff in supporting not just their teams, but also supporting customers who are going through particularly challenging and complex situations, and also to support the more vulnerable and know how to respond to people who are becoming increasingly challenging to support over the phone. We're predicting that we're going to see a continued increase in this type of contact across New Zealand. We're also anticipating that there'll be more organisations and corporate entities contacting us for support to know how to respond to vulnerable clients, vulnerable customers, but also their wider population base of customers and clients and their staff. And more particularly as we experience more and more isolation geographically, but also through anxiety that people might have with community transition and that type of community transition of COVID and that type of thing. So one of the main and most common reasons that people contact Lifeline is about work-related stress, which is very consistent with a survey that Southern Cross Health Society and Business New Zealand conduct on two yearly, which has seen an uplift in the last 2 years particularly of work absenteeism relating to stress, around a 23.5% increase in stress and work absenteeism. What this particular survey and the respondents have cited is that there is almost a fourfold increase in the number of people being absent from work due to work-related stress or anxiety over the 2 years, 2000 and end of 2016 to 2018 and the 2019 report. And non-work related stress has doubled over that time, causing people to not be at work and be underperforming and less productive. So Lifeline and the essence of what our services are about is based on the scientific theory and scientific evidence of what talk therapy can actually do for society and for humans. And what I'm going to do now is hand over to Helena, who's going to talk a little bit about talk therapy and the reason why Lifeline has taken this approach in the last 56 years and why it's so significant to the health and well-being of everybody in society. Helena.
Hi everyone. So talking therapies, especially with Lifeline, is just a way for people to connect, especially when you're feeling so isolated and lonely. It's a way to connect, to feel that you can talk about what's bothering you in a way that you don't feel judged, in a way that a family member might respond, in a way that you feel not heard. Lifeline is there for you guys to feel connected to feel heard. We have some callers who haven't spoken to anyone all day, and so calling Lifeline is their way to connect to people, to build that resilience, to have a bad day, and to be able to remember that you have the resources to get through, or to find some other supports out there to get you through. We definitely promote the idea of working in a workplace, mental health care in a workplace. You spend so much time at work, so it's a great place to remember that positive interactions at work and feeling supported at work can lead on to other areas of your life, can increase your coping skills, self-efficacy, lower your stress. And that doesn't just translate into work life, that translates into all parts of your life. So talking therapy is a way to connect and to feel that you're okay for being who you are and feeling how you are.
Thanks, Helena. So I guess the last 12 months, we've identified that there is a greater need for proactive intervention across New Zealand society, particularly in the area of mental wellbeing, and the need for people to know what to do when someone close to them is, as Helena has said, is feeling a bit challenged or distressed or not really sure who to turn to or what to do. So we've developed a series of programs that are taking the expertise and experience and skills of our counsellors and our clinical psychological staff out into the community and into businesses. We're moving from purely being a response organisation for people in distress and requiring crisis intervention to supporting more early intervention in the community. And how we're doing that is empowering supportive mindsets across organisations and businesses, through teams and across the wider community. And we're doing this by encouraging people to think about how they might implement peer-to-peer support networks inside their organisations by training up and developing a team of people who know how to support each other as a confidant or as a person that people trust to talk about over the water cooler or in the tea room, or just to take somebody out to a cafe for a conversation and just say, hey, I know how you're doing, or I don't know how you're doing, can you let me know if you're okay? This ensures that there is a significant amount of risk assurance that organisations can partake in to ensure that their staff are well, and also that they can think about how they might reduce their staff absenteeism and increase, as somebody said to me just yesterday, their presenteeism, as well as enabling this type of work across communities. So what this looks like is peer support through professional development and training for staff. We also provide outbound wellbeing checks for staff for particular organisations, or any organisation should they want that. Basically, that is for any particular time of change or crisis like we're experiencing right now with COVID, or other situations like Canterbury earthquakes or drought situations for the rural sector, or particular issues that different sectors and industries are experiencing at particular times. We can perform an outbound wellbeing check to staff to just check in and see how they're doing, and provide them with some pastoral care. Simultaneously, we can do the same for organisations, clients and customers, as well as providing a debrief service for people leaders and those peer support teams that are developing more frequently at the moment inside organisations. We also have a few examples more recently of businesses who have wanted to pay it forward and support the community in the area of mental health and wellbeing. An example of how this has worked recently is a small insurance broker organisation, actually. Some of you might know them, Evolve Brokers, and they're a up-and-coming broker enterprise, and they crowdsourced their client base and essentially established a fund to support some of Lifeline's projects. So we developed or designed a program that would support local businesses in a particular area on the North Shore in Auckland who are having a bit of a rough time because of the reduced foot traffic across their business or their businesses due to the various lockdowns, but also a very large FMCG business has had to close its doors in that area, and that's meant that the foot traffic has reduced even more significantly, and that has had a flow-on effect to the wider community in this particular area. So we are providing our workshops to the business owners, encouraging them to support each other, to draw on their own strengths of providing often pastoral care and a listening ear to their regular clients and customers that come through their doors, as well as knowing how they can support often a staff team that might only be 1 or 2 people, and they're responsible for their livelihood, and it means that those business owners can then go home to their families and not feel like they know what to do. They don't need to carry it home with them. So that's a program that is an example of what a pay it forward community activation initiative could look like. What our programs can do is enable high degrees of self-awareness across the population, across groups of individuals, that can build confidence through teams, and that in turn then flows into ensuring more resilience across teams. As Helena has said, it's really important that resilience is developed within people and within teams by being able to talk about issues that people are experiencing and also know how to respond to that in a positive and proactive way. So what we know through evidence is that the act of knowing how to listen to somebody else, knowing how to really notice what might be going on across your teams, knowing what might be, or noticing what's going on within your own family, noticing what's going on across your client base, regularly checking in, not just checking in for a particular reason, but just checking in because you want to make sure they're okay, can support everybody's self-awareness of where they might be at, how they might be responding to how they're feeling. It also supports effective relationships across business, across organisations and community, which in turn ensures that effective decision making can happen, and there's a higher degree of confidence and well-being across any team, and that flows into a more prosperous and resilient community and society nationally. So we've thought about 3 things that each of you could do to think about after this webinar today, where you might want to ask some questions of us about this. And the first thing that we have thought about is how you might think about mobilising your own community around you. Your community might be your immediate team, it might be your own business, the people who work within it, it could be your business directors. How do you want to think about how you might mobilise them? But also the wider community might be those organisations who you support philanthropically, who you might donate to on a regular basis, who you know are doing it hard as well, and you might want to be able to support them, or support your local community who are your customer base also. We believe in a bit of a audacious goal that we have at Lifeline, which is to attempt over the next 3 years to reach and activate 5 million New Zealanders to through our programs, to ensure that everybody has a sense of what it means to really sit down and listen to somebody and hear where they're at. We believe in the multiplier effect of working one business at a time and working with their supply chain, their broader community, their staff, the family members of their staff, and supporting New Zealand to become healthier and develop a supportive mindset. The second thing that you might think about is how you are supporting your customers and staff already. There are a number of organisations in the finance and insurance sector that are doing some fantastic things in supporting their staff by creating teams of subject matter experts and champions in the area of wellbeing and mental wellness, and as well as knowing how to support vulnerable clients and customers particularly. So there is some fantastic work happening in the space already. And we know that we can support you in that way so that you can focus on what your strengths are around delivering financial rigour across New Zealand's economy. And those are the reminder of the tools. So a third thing that you might think about is, how do you support yourself? As a member of a team, as an advisor, as a business owner or a people leader inside your organisation, as a member of a family, as a parent, as a sibling, as a grandparent, it's really important that you know how to put the oxygen mask on yourself as well, particularly at times like this when everybody around us is having various responses to COVID, the pandemic, and the current recession that we are in. So how do you take care of yourself? So Helena is just going to give us a few tips on how you might approach that.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, like you said, you can't put someone else's oxygen mask without yours first. So really thinking about what brings you some joy or some peace or some calm at the end of the day. It might be you go to bed a little bit earlier. You might need to cut down on the wine every week, or connect in with someone that you really trust. There's no magic bullet. There's no magical wand that we wave when you call Lifeline. It's just those little things that all add up. So making sure that you're okay first before you can support other people is really important. We sometimes, as people that are the ones that are leaned on the most, forget to look after ourselves. And so that's something that we practice with our staff a lot, is to practice what we preach. So just have a think about things that work for you. It might be going for a walk. It might be your favourite coffee. Just little things like that all add up. Thanks, Megan.
Yeah, so one of the things that Helena's just touched on is around the people who are leaned on the most often are the ones who are the least, who take care of themselves least. Mm-hmm. And so we have a very robust framework which is embedded in the evidence of psychotherapy and clinical psychology, which essentially is around clinical supervision to support those who are supporting others. Mm-hmm. And we've developed a program that ensures that people leaders and those who are the listening ears inside teams and organisations and communities are able to receive their own form of supervision by way of mentoring and coaching to support them by providing them with a sounding board or giving them somebody to just bounce off the ideas that they have around supporting a teammate or a family member. It's such a critical thing that we often overlook in our business lives and in our lives with our respective families. So essentially that is what we wanted to share with you today. I thought I might just close before we hand over to Richard for questions with an interesting statistic that I learned in the last couple of weeks. And that is over the last few weeks, the New Zealand coroner released the fact that there were a minor 0.1% reduction in the number of completed suicides across New Zealand. So the number of suicides across New Zealand reduced from 685 in 2019 to 654 in 2020. In direct comparison to the number of deaths as a result of road accidents, which was 353 people in 2019. So half of the number of completed suicides across New Zealand. to me, I thought that that was a very important statistic to think about, given the amount of investment and campaigning that happens across very visible mediums across New Zealand around road safety and protecting ourselves on the road, when this area of mental well-being, mental wellness, and preventing suicide or preventing people to feel like they are a burden to others is often not talked about. And so I really want to recognise the Financial Services Council for opening up this conversation with all of you today, because it is a conversation that needs to happen on a daily basis so that we can make it as prevalent and as consistent across the country as the idea of road safety and preventing road deaths. So thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Helena. That was an excellent presentation, and certainly one that kind of took me out of the here and now, because it kind of triggered a whole bunch of other thoughts. You know, we've all had people in our lives who kind of haven't quite managed and haven't quite coped, and the question, of course, is, you know, what could I have done? What could we have done? So thank you for that. I thought there's a great question here from Ramesh, which I think would be good to go to first. So on the line, we've got people from right across the financial services community. If you're dealing with clients, if you're dealing with team members, if you're dealing with colleagues, how would you identify kind of depression and anxiety? What are some of the notable things to kind of look out for?
Helena, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, so we call them red flags for people that are really not coping. So they might say something like, oh, it doesn't matter, I won't be here for much longer, or things like, oh, I don't really care what happens, you can just take whatever you want from me, or even just a change in their demeanour. They're normally happy and willing to chat to you, and then something changes. I don't think you can ever go wrong by asking someone, are you okay? Or showing some form of empathy. If there's trust your gut on it. If you think there's something not quite right, then reach out to someone. I think it's always lovely when someone says, hey, you don't seem yourself, are you okay? So definitely trust your gut. And if you think there's a red flag, just stop and pause and ask how they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, is that helpful?
That's really helpful. There's another great question that's just come in, which it's from, sorry, I can't see who it's from, but thank you for the question. And this question's around the relationship between mental health and money. The FSC's done a bunch of research, but I won't quote you that. But interested, either the anecdote or the percentage. How many calls, Helena, come in to Lifeline where the triggers have been that it's kind of money stress that's really kind of cast out from the money conversation into every other part of life?
I wouldn't know the statistics off the top of my head, but definitely a high percentage of them, especially when you're trying to get extra support for someone, such as accessing counselling or psychologists. The money is just not there to access those appointments. Loss of jobs, stress, they have to take sick days from work because their anxiety or depression is just too much. They all kind of interlink. Financial stress is definitely a big role in that.
Yeah. I mean, our research, just again, for the folks on the end of the line, you can hop onto the FSC website. You know, we had a look at two things. One was money and you, and the very strong link between well-being. So this is the positive side of it. People who have their finances sorted and have a holistic approach tend to be sorted in most parts of their life. Not necessarily all, but more generally. The flip on that, of course, was we asked people how often they worry about money. It was a weekly kind of monthly, quarterly conversation. And the numbers in the weekly, monthly, daily column were alarmingly high. So that kind of burden of weight, if people are walking around going, I can't pay a bill, I've got creditors chasing me, I don't have job security, you can kind of see how those triggers would really, impact someone's ability to just to kind of cope.
Definitely. And that flows through into the responses that people have, particularly if they are stressed about work overload or a family situation, relationship situation, they're living with anxiety and depression. What tends to happen is people move into this area of avoidance and want to distance themselves from the problem or the cause of the trigger, and that can then just manifest and escalate even further. And if people around them don't notice, or if they're not noticing it for themselves, then it can literally just become this self-perpetuating cycle of distress and not going anywhere. And people are very effective because of the nature of the way that our brains are wired as human beings to ideally to head for a survival response to situations of stress. And so often people will be appearing to be something on the surface when in fact there is a whole lot of stuff going on underneath that no one else really knows about.
This question that you raise, and the statistics are alarming around young kids, young Kiwis taking their own lives. I mean, on one hand, it seems a little incongruous given we live in such a, healthy, happy, clean place, but that's not quite the case, is it? Is there any insight that you folks have got around why those stats are so high?
I think from my experience is that mental health isn't talked about enough, and there's a stigma of I can't tell my parents I'm not struggling because they just tap me on the back and say you'll be right. So I think we need to create these conversations about mental well-being and building resilience so that when people are struggling they feel confident to go out and talk to someone about that.
And Helena, sorry Megan,
That's okay.
Sorry, Helena, and resilience. I mean, there are things actively a little bit to one of those earlier slides. Resilience is something you can work on, yeah.
Yeah, building resilience for sure. It's a skill to learn. It's not something you're born with. Like whether you're right-handed or left-handed, resilience is something that we all need to practice and learn.
Is there stuff for people on the phone who may be running businesses or leading teams? Can work on? Are there, things, there are obviously the red flags you pointed to, but are there things that you could point to around helping people think about resilience, build resilience, kind of get, fit in terms of resilience?
I think if someone's saying they're not doing well, the first thing to do is to not panic. If you're able to show empathy and care for the person on the phone or in the team, you're doing half the work. The other thing is to try to build on that person's strengths. If they've been through this situation before, how did they do it then? What was different did you reach out to a certain person? Did you have a medication that you might not be on? Did you see a doctor? All those kind of things. Sometimes people have been through this situation before and don't remember it. So building on past strengths can definitely help build people's resilience.
Sorry, Megan, I cut across you before.
No, that's okay. I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. I'm sorry, Richard.
No worries.
I really just wanted to reinforce, I wanted to reinforce Helena's comment about our societal culture, particularly for young people, that in New Zealand we have this mentality of she'll be right, and in New Zealand we don't talk enough about this, as Helena has said. In other cultures, mental well-being and mental unwell-being is talked about so much more. People receiving counselling, actively seeking therapy and counselling is talked about more readily in other OECD countries. It's considered to be a norm in other OECD countries, whereas in New Zealand there is still stigma attached to it. That is reflected in the statistics from the employee assistance programs, where roughly 1 to 4% of an employee base will actually reach out to EAP, because a number of staff will often think that that is a stigma. There's going to be a risk for them being not considered for a promotion, or they might think that they have their fellow colleagues or their people leaders might think that they're weak, they're unable to cope. Often people will just think of themselves as unable to reach out for help because there is going to be a stigma around it, and they don't have anybody in their lives who they can talk to about it. So that's something that the culture of New Zealand seems to have bred significantly, which we need to change.
Yeah, it's interesting when you point that out. I mean, take America. Every sitcom, every telly show's got someone seeing their therapist, which is usually it's either a serious issue or it's part of the narrative. But you're right. It feels like it's normalized.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Folks, it's been a really illuminating conversation, so thank you. Megan, we started the conversation before we came on with your front slide, which I thought was a really nice way to perhaps wrap this discussion and the picture that it paints and the stories that you tell, and wondered whether you could share that again.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Richard. So this is imagery that we use for our navigating and champion or peer support workshops that we deliver across the community and into organisations. And the imagery is designed to reflect how we would like people to feel. A wonderful calm river. In Te Ao Māori, the awa or the river is a source of life. It's actually a family member. It's Māori are genealogically connected to the river of their region. The health of that river essentially reflects the health of themselves and vice versa. This image also connects not only to Te Ao Māori, but also to the idea of being at peace, being calm, being well. The fact that there is a horizon in the distance essentially symbolises the sense of hope, and also for people to have a destination or to have a frontier that they're seeking. So there is promise in it, there's possibility in it. The whirlpool that is located in this image at the mouth of the estuary there is designed specifically to symbolise where people do have challenges that they come up against in life, across every aspect of life. And what we encourage through our workshops is that people build that resilience that Helena's been talking about to be able to navigate themselves around the whirlpool. For some people, they might not necessarily have the tools for whatever many reasons, biological reasons, historical reasons, the environments that they are in. And we talk about people who might find themselves sucked into that whirlpool with struggle and needing to have people to help them get out of it. And so we then delve into the workshops more deeply into what it means to be a connector or a navigator to support people to come out of those whirlpools, but also to encourage people to know how to navigate around them and carry on their way into the calming horizon. So yeah, that's the symbolism.
So that's probably a beautiful way to end this discussion, and to thank you for the whole discussion. But I think, that's a really powerful message of hope and optimism. Obviously, Mental Health Week is about celebrating that, but also acknowledging that it's pretty tough out there for a lot of people. It's been pretty tough for all of us this year. No one started the year in 2020 thinking my year's going to be locked away in my, whatever, home office or my world of Zoom, and that's if you're kind of in gainful employment. So I think it's about just acknowledging and recognizing that. And I think then to Helena, to your points around tools and flags and red flags and helping people and putting on the oxygen mask first. So really appreciate that. We have recorded today. It is going to be available up on the FSC YouTube channel. What's left for me to do is to say thank you online for joining. Thank you to Megan and to Helena for sharing their expertise, and have an awesome afternoon and awesome rest of the week. Thanks, everyone.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Bye for now. Cheers, then.
Bye-bye.